All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into some pretty big e-commerce news, and that is this new Adobe Commerce as a cloud service that's launching in June 2025.
Okay.
And, when we hear about that, we all think, oh, like Shopify, right? Another e-commerce platform. Like, is it going to be a Shopify killer? But,
Okay.
what we found in our deep dive is that it's not really the same thing at all.
Yeah.
So what we're going to try to do today is really break down what this new service is, who it's for, and why it's actually pretty different from Shopify.
Yeah, I think, one of the most interesting things right off the bat is how Adobe's positioning this,
Yeah.
We really dug into it. And it's very clear this is not like a direct competitor to your standard Shopify or even Shopify Advanced. This is operating on a different level from the get-go.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found really interesting is that it's, what they're calling headless by default. And so for people who don't know a ton about the technical side of e-commerce, what does that actually mean, headless?
So basically you're separating like the presentation of your online store. So what the customer sees from the engine that powers it, that's handling the orders and the inventory and all that stuff. And those two parts communicate through like digital connectors. It's kind of like a universal translator.
Yeah, right.
And so Adobe's new service is built this way from the ground up.
Okay.
Whereas with Shopify, like going headless is more of like an advanced option, often involving their Shopify Plus plan and like using some additional tools and requiring a bit more of a technical setup.
Got it.
So this tells us right away that Adobe is targeting businesses that have like more complex needs right out of the box.
Like enterprise businesses.
Exactly.
Oh.
Like imagine like a large retailer that wants to connect their online store to their mobile app,
Right.
their in-store kiosks, their loyalty programs. Headless gives them that freedom to connect everything.
Yeah. Well, and they're also saying that this is going to be like provisioning in minutes.
Right.
Which is a huge leap from their traditional cloud setups.
Yeah.
But, they're also saying that easier doesn't necessarily mean the plug-and-play simplicity that you get with Shopify.
Right.
So what's kind of the takeaway there in terms of how easy it is to actually get this thing up and running?
I think the important thing is that while Adobe is making the initial setup like much faster, it's still built for enterprise-level customization.
Okay.
So you'll be up and running quicker with Adobe than you were before.
Yeah.
But it's not aiming for that kind of out-of-the-box simplicity of Shopify, which serves, a much broader range of businesses, including, the less complex ones.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really about striking that balance between speed and flexibility.
Got it. Okay. And then what about cost? Because that's obviously a huge consideration for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what we're seeing is like a major shift. They're saying lower TCO and licensing costs, which sounds like they're trying to move towards the affordability and predictability of something like Shopify Plus.
I think that's exactly right. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it suggests that Adobe is trying to remove a major hurdle for like larger businesses that might have been wary of their traditionally higher expenses.
Right.
So by becoming more price competitive with platforms like Shopify Plus, they're positioning themselves as a more viable option for a specific segment of the enterprise market.
Okay, so let's talk about who this is really designed for, because what we're seeing is it's not going after the Shopify Advanced customer.
Right.
It's not really for your typical small to medium-sized business at all.
Yeah.
This is really for those bigger stores that might be considering like a more complex headless setup with Shopify Plus and Hydrogen and components and all of that.
Exactly.
So it's really about that like need for headless architecture from day one.
Yeah, and I think this raises an interesting question, like what kind of business inherently needs that headless flexibility? And it's typically larger enterprises that require highly customized and interconnected experiences across various customer touch points. They need that freedom and that architectural flexibility.
So really the message here is that Adobe Commerce as a cloud service is not a Shopify killer.
Right.
They're not trying to compete with all of Shopify's offerings.
It seems like they're carving out a very specific space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the critical insight here. It's carving out a space for brands needing that enterprise-grade flexibility offered by a fully managed SaaS environment where headless architecture is really the foundation.
Right.
And it's about addressing, a distinct set of requirements compared to what Shopify primarily caters to, even at its higher tiers.
Got it. Okay, so to kind of sum all this up, Adobe Commerce as a cloud service launching next year, This isn't just another Shopify.
Yeah.
This is something very different with its headless by default architecture targeting larger enterprises with complex customization needs.
Right.
It's not a broad competitor, but is really a specialized solution.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings us to a final thought for, our listeners today considering this information.
Yeah.
What kind of e-commerce platform and architecture, be it a more integrated solution or a highly flexible headless approach, best aligns with the current and future needs and complexity of your potential or existing business? It's a key question to consider as you evaluate your options.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive on Adobe Commerce as a cloud service, and we will see you next time.
See you later.